What a day this is. Our 275th anniversary. If you notice, we sang a hymn from Carolyn Winfrey Gillette, "Looking Back, Oh God, We Wonder." If you really look at that hymn and the words, each verse covers a time period. It starts in verse 1 with the early settlers, the founders of this church. The second verse goes to the traditions of word and sacrament, or in our language as we know today, who we are. The third verse looks to our community, or who is our neighbor. And the fourth looks to who God is calling this church to become. It's a frequent refrain that people have heard over the past 3 years here. Now, time is a funny thing. We humans, we're all mortal, and we have this natural bit of time on this earth allotted to us. Time we can use for good, for evil, to take care of ourselves, to take care of others. Some of us, though, especially now, live at such a frenzied pace. We try to get everything done perfectly, and everything done yesterday. Anybody understand that? Yeah, a lot of us do. Our lives are busy, and they're dramatic because there is so much going on. And there are two ways to look at how we're living today. There's a continuum. Being self-absorbed in our importance. Like we have to do everything today and it's got to be done right and we've got to do it. Or else, God, something's going to fall apart. And there's also what I've seen in people is self-absorbed apathy. Like, we can't do anything anyway. We're not important enough. God wouldn't possibly use us. God wouldn't use us to heal this world. What we say doesn't matter. And I was sitting here, I'm thinking and I'm listening to people, and I know how people have grown in this church. How people now read who would never read before, whose people's faith has grown, whose fellowship with one another, whose kindness with one another has grown. We become a gentler people in this church. I mentioned earlier that the metaphor developed for our church during our appreciative inquiry process was that of a river. And I have expanded this tremendously, so I'm going to simply put this concept. That those of us here in the river get nourishment from the waters themselves, from that environment, from the water as it trickles to us, as it burbles in the river. That feeds our banks and downstream. Now, water is an important metaphor for me as well. I was on a retreat once, my first silent retreat, and I went down to the ocean and just sat on the rocks. And I watched those waves crash. I mean, it was glorious. But what I realized is that when those waves are crashing, when we are so busy, when life is so hectic, we can't see what's actually happening. Those crashing waves are pulling, rearranging, filling all those places that are dry, taking out what's decayed. But do we see that? When we're so busy, when we're so self-absorbed in our busy lives, do we see that happening? Do we see that water, dispelling the stagnation, transforming what's happening everywhere it hits, wearing down the rocks, changing things that happen over time. Remember, time is a funny thing. And as I was watching those rocks and those waves, I remembered my 2-year-old son. We had been at Beavertail in Rhode Island. It's a lighthouse, and it's really beautiful there. And as a 2-year-old, he just went to the pools, and he was so excited to get into the pools. So I took that inspiration, and I stayed by those pools. And what I saw there was life in abundance. It was common. It was no less real than the busyness of those waves. I cannot stand by the ocean without feeling both incredibly insignificant, a little speck on this time continuum that we have. And yet what I realized in that calm pool, where the water was trickling in and replenishing it, but very, very gently, that was incredibly significant. So I saw the continuum between myself even being both significant and insignificant. And I think that's what we need to capture about our lives in God. That in some ways we are all incredibly special. And yet in other ways, we are just part of God's creation. And what we do with that is important. God's time is eternal. And that's when I feel insignificant. Has anybody ever looked at a rug or a tapestry? Anybody here ever looked at the tapestry? And you look at the tapestry and you see the picture and it's absolutely gorgeous, right? What happens, and for those of you who sew and who have done quilts and who have crocheted, what happens on the bottom? You see all the knots. You see all the little colors and then they stop, and then another color starts, and then you see all the knots. I believe that is like God. That's God looking down on creation, on all of us, on those folks 275 years ago that developed this church, with an idea, a vision of where we would be and where we could grow. And yet, all we see are the knots. As Rick said earlier, all we see are the facts that, church is different than it used to be 275 years ago. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, he says, "Now I see only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these are love." As I was selecting the text for today, I chose Micah, primarily because Micah tells us what God requires of us: to do justice, to love kindness, and to humbly walk with God. I chose Romans because it talks about the marks of a true Christian. So when you go home, look at these differently. See where you fit in these scriptures. Because Paul reminds us to be genuine in our love and to hate evil and not to seek vengeance. He goes on even to say to feed our enemies and overcome evil with good. And then the New Testament mark was Jesus' commandments to love both God, ourselves, and our neighbors. So today I'm going to focus on love. Love for God and from God. The key to this is especially in Romans. We are to love everyone, not just those who think like us, who look like us, who may have the same amount of money as we have, the same ideas we have. We are to love people that seem unlovable. That's hard to do, isn't it? I'm sure you people have known some folks who are really abrasive or who have ideas that just make your hair stand up. But we are to love those people. We are not to judge. We are to hold Jesus' teachings and values. We are to center ourselves by bringing love and compassion to the world. Not for our glory, not because we're all that grand, but because that's what we've been given. That's the gift of God for us. And that's what we need to bring to this world. It's not our glory, it's God's glory. And if you understand that what you do is for God, then you know what? You're not so important anymore. And you can let God use you to heal a broken world. I love the saying that Jesus came to challenge the comfortable. Challenge the comfortable and to comfort the challenged. Now, every church starts with a passion for faith, a mission, and a vision. 275 years ago, this church came together in faith. I don't know how many of you know that in order to be a town, you had to have a congregational church. Because when we first came to Massachusetts, Congregationalism was the religion of the state. You couldn't vote if you weren't a congregational. That's why Roger Williams took off and went to Rhode Island. And you had, if you wanted to incorporate as a town or a city, you had to have a church. And I believe it had to be on Main Street. So they formed Spencer. And it was a time of community, if you remember those words from Carolyn Winfrey Gillette. Different worldview than what we have now. Neighbors knowing all your neighbors. Neighbors helping neighbors. And where those who were in need were actually cared for. Through our ongoing sermon here at First Congregational Church of Spencer, we believe that God is leading us back into the community. Remember, the trees grow out of the riverbed. Some of them grow in the water, yes, but many of those branches are underground, coming to find nourishment and sustenance from the river. In some ways, we've come full circle to our roots. We may not know our neighbors as well as we did yesterday, or in 75 years ago. We are moving out so that we can make this community a better place. Nourished in faith and fellowship, as Paul proclaims to the Romans, we need to live in harmony with one another. And the church kind of regrets this. They want to see these pews all filled. And so what we try to do is bring what we used to do to this new time and this new place. We're trying to build roots in a world that is increasingly unrooted, untethered. We've got the global global village that we all know about now. We have the internet that brings us to ideas and peoples and access to information that we could never have imagined 275 years ago. Social media has brought people together, but that's a plus and a minus. because we don't know our neighbors as we once did. We can sit on our social media platforms and find out what's going on with our friends and family. But are we having a block party? Are we bringing a dinner dish over to people who just moved in across the street? How are we reaching out? And how can we evolve to be more relevant for our community? The old rules of flocking to the church because it's the center of town no longer apply. And this church is beginning to embrace the mission of outreach. There's a wonderful quote from the film, Do You Believe? It was a film study that we did during Lent. And I just thought it was wonderful. At times, it seems like the church has invested in a bright blinking sign that says, "Come in, you're welcome here." Sometimes we never take the actual step outside into the world to encounter the people who really need our help. These hopeless people may be standing in the parking lot, terrified to come in, while we stand inside, terrified to go out. Remember, those trees grow on the banks of the river. In your actions and relationships, may Jesus be present in your lives. May you understand the source of your being and your giftedness as from God. And with that, may this church, as we go forth, as we think about what might even happen 275 years from now, may we go forth and transform the world, guided by God's vision. Not because we're so important, not because we have the right answers, but because God inspires us. We are God's children. And God is the person to judge, not us. May God, 275 years from now, be pleased